right. Again, my name is Ari. I'm the Awkwardly Zen founder and one of the support team, and I am so excited to introduce you to Paul H. Smith today. He has got a vast knowledge of remote viewing and a huge background in it, and I'm just so grateful that our friend Anna introduced him to the Awkwardly Zen world so he could come and talk about this subject that he's very passionate about, he's very knowledgeable about, and he's going to run us through some activities, which is very exciting. So Paul, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. I'm tempted to shut down my camera too, but I guess I better not do that, right?
No,
So,
I think we might need to see you.
yeah. So just to let you know, I'm going to have this eye closed quite a bit. I am in the 7th month of a 2-week recovery from an eye surgery. So, and I'm not winking at you. All right. So anyway, yeah, I am a former, I'm not sure how you say it, an alumnus of the military's Stargate remote viewing program. And shortly, I'm going to give you some background in that. But I spent 7 years in that program as both an operational remote viewer and also as a trainer and security officer and recruiting officer, a bunch of other stuff. We all had multiple hats in that organization because it was a small outfit. I grew up in Southern Nevada, spent a lot of time in the Rockies and farms and stuff as a kid, did a Mormon mission in Switzerland, went to BYU and got a degree in Middle Eastern Studies, and then ended up joining the Army. And along the way, I ended up being recruited as a psychic spy. Maybe in the Q&A, somebody will be curious about how that happened, because they usually are. When I finally retired, I went to University of Texas, Austin. Maybe there's some Longhorns here, I don't know. And got a PhD, that is a doctorate of philosophy in philosophy, studying philosophy of mind, consciousness, and philosophy of parapsychology. And I've leveraged all that in my business, which is remote viewing instructional services. I teach formal, high quality, I guess I could say, remote viewing courses. I've got some books and stuff. I'll talk about those later on. And as you can see, I like to live in chaos, just from the background here. That's my real office. Fortunately, you can't see the top of my desk, or you'd all freak out, I'm sure. So I'm going to start off, and I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully we can make it work right this time. There we go. I think this is going to work. You're a miracle worker. So I'm going to talk about remote viewing. I'm going to give you a fair amount of detail. There's a lot of stuff crammed into this, and even then, it will only scratch the surface of what there is to know about this. So, remote viewing. Now, it's not. Let me try clicking. Now, of course, it's not going to advance. What is the problem? There we go. Remote viewing, martial art for the mind. So, think about what a martial art is. Martial art embodies self-discipline. It's rigorous. You have to gather your ability, as I say it, and then you got to impose order and structure on it. Many of us have abilities to do a lot of things, but until we discipline those abilities, we really don't accomplish nearly what we could, right? Essentially, this discipline confines and directs the abilities that we have natively. Martial art tends to be undermined if you're lazy and if you get sloppy in the way you do it. You have to be, there's a certain amount of precision and determination, motivation necessary. It requires that you transcend your self-imposed limitations. Okay, we all have abilities, and we tend to circumscribe those, to limit them because of our own self-messaging that tells us that we are limited in what we can do, and that's basically false. All right. It requires that you pursue conscientious practice and conditioning. You have to stay in shape, but you have to keep practicing. If you stop doing it, you actually tend to lose the edge that you might have otherwise. So here's an instance where remote viewing worked what we might consider a miracle. So it was in Zaire, Africa. That's now the Congo. Zaire, Africa, March 1979. The Soviets had this, well, I'll tell you what happened. So this was this Tu-22. It was a bomber, but it had been outfitted as a reconnaissance aircraft. And the CIA paid a Libyan pilot to steal that plane and fly it down to South Africa so that we could exploit the secrets. Well, halfway through, the Libyan pilot got cold feet, bailed out, left the plane on autopilot. It ran out of gas and crashed somewhere in a triple canopy jungle in Zaire. So the Russians were desperate to get the plane back because they didn't want the CIA to get their secrets. And the CIA was desperate to get the secrets. And so they were both looking for it, largely using satellites and other reconnaissance aircraft. But if you know anything about satellites, their ground footprint is tiny, and Zaire was a big country. And so they were not having success. And in fact, they were looking in the wrong part of the country, right? So this kind of gives you an idea. The plane was down in this country, this is all of Africa. The country was this big. The plane turned out to be down somewhere over here. I'm not sure exactly where it was. That's never been totally revealed. So how did we find it? Well, there was a small remote viewing program going on at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. And the director of that program asked a young Air Force enlisted woman named Rosemary Smith to use the ability she had recently developed in this program to try and locate the wreckage. So they gave her a map of Africa, the entire continent, and showed her a picture of a Tu-22 aircraft and said, a plane like this is missing somewhere in Africa. We want you to do your best to find it. So she went through whatever process she used. She made a little circle in Zaire. So Zaire's not on this map because this is a newer map. Wherever it was a tiny circle, about three, roughly. How do I get rid of this thing? Hang on a second. Can I shift this over? So the controls are right in the middle of my slides. There, I got it moved. Okay, good. She drew a circle covering about 3 square miles diameter on the ground. And of course, now I've messed up there we go. And they found that aircraft within that circle. You consider 3 square miles on the continent of Africa. I mean, that's just mind-blowing that was successful. And lest you think this is just a war story I'm telling you and that I have no evidence to prove it, Jimmy Carter, 20 years later, with a rather hazy memory of the event, he probably didn't know the details anyway. Usually you don't brief the president on the details of these kind of things. He was at a commencement ceremony for Emory University, and this was reported in, I believe Reuters reported this, and he was asked, what was the strangest thing that happened while you were president? And everybody thought he was going to talk about his UFO experience or the killer bunny that attacked his canoe when he was out paddling around or whatever. But no, he said this. He said, the head of the CIA asked a psychic to come in. She went into a trance, and while she was in the trance, she gave some latitude and longitude figures. We focused our satellite cameras on that point, and the plane was there. He talked about this at least twice, maybe 3 times, and it's in the journals, the White House journals, from where they keep records of things that happened on a given day. Now he got the details wrong, but the essential count is correct. So this is the only time where a president actually validated one of the remote viewing events, established that it really did happen. It was really successful. All right. So remote viewing, what is it? Well, think about it this way. What if somebody said to you, I just bought a new house. I'm not going to tell you what it looks like. You'll just have to guess, right? You think you could do that? What if somebody gave you a number? I like to use 8675309. Okay. What if somebody gave you a number, 8675309, then said, this number stands for a certain location somewhere on Earth. I want you to describe in words and sketch it well enough that people who are familiar with the place would recognize it. You have to do it in less than half an hour, not knowing the name or nature of the place or anything else about it. You're not allowed to ask anyone. You're not allowed to use any books, pictures. You're not allowed to use any modern technology. Okay, the only tool you can use is your own mind. So the question is, do you think you could do that? And most people don't think they could. I like this graphic because it represents the contents of the modern American male's mind, right? Total randomness. Okay. So what is remote viewing? A kind of simple definition of it is receiving real impressions, concepts, and sensory data from a distant or hidden target using only the powers of the mind, in other words, extrasensory perception alone. So it is a form of ESP. Now, there's a little bit more to it than this. This could describe a lot of different ESP approaches or psychic behaviors. And I'll get to what the difference is in a minute. So remote viewing is a learned skill. Anybody can learn it within certain limitations. It's based on an innate ability that everybody has. We are born with this ability, just like we're born with the ability to speak. We have to learn how to do it, but we have the ability, okay? Plus all the other things that humans do. We have this ability as well. It's just not always actualized because people don't realize they have it. Depends on following correct principles, plus lots of practice for consistency and accuracy. All right, so what it is not. Remote viewing is not channeling. It is not astral projection or out-of-body experience, okay? There may be a relationship here, but it is definitely a different kind of experiential phenomenon. It is not video in the head. Now, let me first go back to the channeling thing. I want to point out, I'm not saying channeling is not real. I'm not saying it is real. I don't know. There are lots of other psychic modalities, some of which probably are real, some of which probably aren't real, but I'm not making any comment on that here. I'm just saying people get this misunderstanding that somehow remote viewing is a form of channeling. It is not. It doesn't require any external entity for you to do this. This comes from your own inner capabilities, okay? It's not video in the head. Now, if I'm in a live class, I say, well, I get people to tell me, well, what is video in the head? I'll just cut to the chase here. What I'm talking about is the way Hollywood presents being psychic. When you're watching a movie or a TV show that involves somebody being psychic, it's always like this unfolding video. The psychic has got this kind of conceptual experience in their heads that's sequential, that's integrated, that's just like watching it on TV. They see a video of in their head of the perpetrator's car. They get the license plate, whatever it is, right? It is not at all like that. Okay, and I'll tell you what it is like here shortly. All right, so remote viewing results can include written, verbal, sketched, or even three-dimensional models like made out of clay or other things. As you gain this information comes in your mind, the experiences that come in your mind, you represent them on paper, either sketching or verbally, or you actually can build a model. If you've seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you've seen Richard Dreyfuss building Devil's Tower out of mashed potatoes on the dining room table. That is a part of the kind of remote viewing I teach. And there actually is a connection between that movie and the remote viewing program, but maybe in the Q&A we'll get to that. Okay, remote viewing requires a certain protocol, or in other words, a set of rules that you need to follow if you're going to actually do real remote viewing. Okay. So what are these rules? First one is a remote viewer cannot be told anything about the target until they're done with their remote viewing session. We call that being blind. Okay. Well, let me go back to that. Well, yes, go back for that for a second. So people say, well, how do you know what the target is if you don't know what the target is, right? And there's a fairly complicated answer to that, but just be aware it really does work. Being blind is important for one specific reason. If you know what the target is, then your analytic mind is going to start guessing and throwing in stuff it already knows. It's going to generate a huge amount of noise. Another topic I'll talk about soon. It'll generate this whole huge amount of noise in your head that will actually blanket the rather subtle or nuanced signal with the real information in it. So it's really good if the remote viewer doesn't know what the target is, because that shuts down a lot of that noise effectively. So, all right. So no one associated with the remote viewer before or during the session should know anything about the target either. We call that, I think I have a bullet for it. So we call that being double blind. So the viewer doesn't know what the target is. The interviewer that may be present doesn't know what the target is. The reason for that is so that there's no nonverbal communication that tells the viewer anything about the target that is presented non-psychically. Right. So you want double blind because that really makes it a clean process without the viewer getting hints and stuff from somebody who knows what it is already. We want to avoid that. The target data must be verifiable. There's this real popular thing to do in remote viewing today, remote view Bigfoot or remote view UFOs or remote view the crucifixion or even the creation, right? Some people even want to remote view the devil. Why, I don't know. That just seems to make no sense to me. But all of those are what I call anomaly targets. That you can't get feedback from those. You can't verify that what you get in a remote viewing, in your remote viewing session is actually real. And there is a certain imaginative component or fantasy component that can creep into a remote viewing session if you're not careful. So for it to be real remote viewing, you need to do targets that you can actually get ground truth on. Okay. Doesn't mean you can't play with it, but it like see if you can find out what happened to really happened at Roswell, right? But that's a kind of that's problematic in that you can never learn anything from that because you can't get feedback on it. Okay, so all right, and feedback is really important because that's how you learn to remote view. It's just like trying, if you don't get feedback on a target, it's like trying to ride the bike without your inner ears giving you balance signals. It just doesn't work. You got to have that feedback to make it a learning experience. Okay. All right, so here's some example of remote viewing results. This is one I did back when I was training. This was the final sketch I did in the session. It was probably 4 or 5 pages long, but this is the resulting sketch. Again, I was totally blinded, so I had no idea what this was. And here's what the target was in comparison. So consider totally not knowing what it is and yet being able to produce a sketch that resembles the target so closely. That's pretty amazing. Even I was amazed. All right, here's one of my students did. The target was a copper mine out in Utah. We did this in Maryland, or no, sorry, in Austin when I was still in Austin. Totally blind, and he made this. This is my cursor. Can you guys see that cursor on there? Okay, good. So he made this model. He said this is way down. There's some stuff in the bottom. It's got these layers to it. I don't know what it is, okay, but this is what it looks like. And of course, you can see it's a really nice, a nice representation of this, given the constraints under which this guy was working. Okay, so here's another one. So this points out that that definitely not all the results come out perfectly, not nearly as well as the first one I showed you. So this was the target. This is another one of my viewers, my students. He said, okay, well, there's land, and there's water in between. And then there's this platform with these stanchions on it. And there's stuff on the platform. And oh, I don't know why. And he just sketches this arch. He said, I don't know why I sketched that arch. I just felt like I needed to sketch that arch. So what was going on was the subconscious was telling you, hey, there's more to this than you think, right? But it couldn't quite get that message clearly into his conscious awareness. And so it gave him this kind of kinesthetic experience that he needed to make this shape on the paper. And so he did. And then, of course, later when he gets the feedback, he sees why he did it. Okay. That is often how remote viewing works, is that you get pieces of it and you get really strong elements of it, but exactly how they go together doesn't become clear to you until you actually see the feedback at the end. Okay. Some of these things, though, are absolutely literal. They're very detailed, absolutely literal, but you, the viewer, have no idea what it is you're doing, okay? This is another session I did, and you know I've got these things. I thought, wow, that looks like a shaving brush, and this looked like some kind of goggles or maybe even an owl. That was one of my, and so that's where you're expressing the guesses your left brain is giving you. You're right. Over here you put down, well, reminds me of goggles, or reminds me of an owl, or reminds me of a shaving brush. But what that suggests is it isn't exactly what you think it is, but it's similar. It reminds you of it, right? So here was the actual target. You can see, once you see the feedback, this was absolutely literal, okay? And when I saw it, I go, what? Oh man, I can't believe I did that, you know? But if you note the shaving brush thing, was the closest representation I could get to this welding rod and the sparks coming off of it, right? And these were actually quite clearly goggles, but notice they're not exactly the way they're constructed, but very close considering I had no idea what this was, right? So some of the results are both visual and verbal. You see this one. If you wrote this summary, I'm going to ask someone to read it. No, I'm just kidding. I broke it down into bullets here, right? So they got this impression of a dome, multi-level, repetitive, square, rectangular shaped structure, a building or structure that had these features to it. It had a cream color exterior. The inside colors were gold, yellow, red, blue, gray, green, plus others. It was made of wood and stone. There's light shining through colored glass. The structure was ornate, contained art, and was historical. There were 2 prominent wooden rectangular doors at the entrance. The people here wore flowing clothing with head drapings, and it gave her an impression of seriousness, respectfulness, deeply felt feelings. It is a holy place. Okay, and in a live presentation, I'll say, well, what do you think it was? People say, well, it was a mosque or it was a church or whatever, right? And in fact, it was a monastery. This is Ettal Monastery in Bavaria. Beautiful place. Notice it does have a lot of stained glass, it does have a lot of light, it does have a lot of gold and all these colors, definitely a lot of art. It's very historical. This thing is like 1,000 years old, I think, something like that. It does have these prominent wooden doors at the entryway, and of course, people here wear kind of draped clothing and head drapings and stuff. And you can see the sketch is really nice representation. She even got the rectangular ones. Usually people write do like oval ones or something like that, or, well, I guess they are oval. Never mind, she got rectangular ones, right? But here's your doors. Now notice she emphasized the doors because that was a feature that attracted her attention. And in a remote viewing session, you'll also often find the things that attract your attention get distorted. They're out of proportion to the rest of the thing because that's what you're attending to. But nonetheless, this is an amazing success in my opinion. Okay, some remote viewing results are mostly graphic or they're kinesthetic. When I say kinesthetic, they involve body motion, such as in 3-dimensional modeling or whatever. And this is an example of one of those. I was actually in the office. We were working with the SRI people, the Stanford Research Institute people who were doing our training. And I was in the office when this guy did this one, and he's in the viewing room, and he comes running out saying, somebody's got to have a blue magic marker. I have to have a blue magic marker. And so then he goes back in, and later on we get to see the model. And you see, he wanted blue because he wanted there to be no mistake that what he was representing here was water, right? And so you can see that that's a pretty nice representation. You've got the abutments, the dam. This is Grand Coulee Dam, by the way. Got the powerhouse here, the turbine house, whatever they call it, and then the spillways and everything. Very nice job. So I'm going to briefly hit the kinds of remote viewing, because if you do get into this, you're going to find that there's quite a menagerie of remote viewing methodologies out there, right? So the one I teach, and the one that was developed by the people who developed remote viewing in the first place, I'll talk about them shortly, is controlled remote viewing, or CRV, and I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. Then there's derivations and offshoots of that. There's scientific remote viewing, technical remote viewing, no somatics. Okay, there's all these different kinds of people. They'll see the control remote viewing. They'll say, oh, I can improve on that, and then they'll come up with something new and give it their own name, right? The question whether these are really improvements or not, of course, is open to dispute. But nonetheless, you will run into all of these out there, plus others. So there's extended remote viewing, and this is another variety we did at Fort Meade in the remote viewing program. Essentially, this is more of a, I'm not quite sure what to call it, but it's essentially mind awake, body asleep. So you lay on a bed and you try and achieve this hypnagogic state between sleep and awake, and then perceive things. I like to joke that we were the only operational military intelligence unit in the entire system that had a bed as a piece of tactical equipment. And then there's an organization in Hawaii called the Hawaii Remote Viewing Guild that have their own version as well. And this is a fairly widely practiced version as well. There's lots of other smaller ones out there, but these are probably the main ones to consider. Okay, so I'm going to call it controlled remote viewing. This just shows it has 6 stages, as we call them. And it starts off with, you just get, in stage 1, you just get a flash or perception of what the overall target might be, whether it's land or water or structure, or it can also be life form or event or activity. As you evolve into the session, the next stage is you start getting perceptions. And these are little bits and pieces of perception, like you get a color, smell, a flash of light, a texture, whatever. And you collect all of these as you go through, writing them down as you have the experience. And gradually you start to build an idea of what this target is like, okay, and what its components are. Stage 3, dimensional characteristics, this is the point where you start being able to sketch it, although this is really it's really kind of a subconsciously generated sketch. You're getting bits and pieces of it again, and ultimately, hopefully, you can put it together. I'm not going to actually get into the details of the rest of them here. They just kind of, the last one, the stage 6, is one where you actually get to make a clay model of the target. But that's where you get into the more detailed aspects. So I'll give you an example. If the target is the Eiffel Tower, the very first stage lasts a few seconds. You get the impression of a structure. You recognize it as a structure. Then you get into stage 2, you say, well, this thing is black, metallic, flaking, rusty, food smells, chirping, squeaking sounds. I feel breezy. It's in a grassy area, that kind of thing, right? And then when you move into stage 3, you actually start sketching it. Now, if the Eiffel Tower, you could conceivably sketch the Eiffel Tower like that mosque drawing from before. That I showed you. But often what you get is just pieces of it. So with the Eiffel Tower, you might draw a bunch of crisscrossy lines and say, well, there's these metallic things that go back, cross each other and create the structure. So these other ones, so in stage 4, you might get the impression of tourism, foreign, you might even get France, you get monumental, commemorative, those kinds of things. I'll skip stage 5 altogether. That's too much to explain. And then in stage 6, you maybe actually build a model of the Eiffel Tower. And at this point, in stage 3, you might recognize it as the Eiffel Tower. In stage 6, there's a really good chance you would recognize it as the Eiffel Tower. So anyway, that's kind of how controlled remote viewing unfolds. So here's an example of a controlled remote viewing session. This is another one I did. I use a lot of mine because I have the intellectual property rights to them, so I can feel comfortable showing them, right? But I'll show some of my others as well, because I also have some ability to access them. So I'm not going to talk you through all this, but you can see it starts off with just a very kind of impressionistic sketch of sorts. We call it that an ideogram. Then verbals describing the sensory experience you have and the dimensional feeling. And then you start sketching, and sketches tend to morph. They start off not all that accurate, but as you get deeper into the session, as long as you keep doing it, they get more and more accurate. So, and then you write a summary at the end. So here's the salient parts of this. So these were the, all right, how do I get out of that without screwing everything up? Okay, well, that worked. So these were the sketches. I had this impression there's something kind of streaming down from above. This thing was round. I really had the impression of some kind of coliseum or sports facility. And then final sketch was this, and I drew this. I had no idea at the time why I was doing it. Just felt like it was kind of like a luminous, sparky kind of a thing. And then there was what I seemed to perceive as a coliseum with a bunch of structures around it. Well, it turned out it was the Bird Nest Stadium for the Beijing Summer Olympics. And now here's the interesting thing. I don't really care about the Olympics. I hadn't watched a single thing about them on TV. I had never seen this before. Never seen a picture of it. I had no idea this even existed. And so when they show it to me, I said, what's that? And they had to explain it. And then then I started looking at this. You see, I kept wanting to put these lines on it. I wasn't sure how they went, but I remember I kept trying to want to put these lines on it, and you can see that it's all about the lines. Now they're oriented all kind of randomly in a way, and I can make my no more, dress right dress, but nonetheless, now I understood why I put those lines. But this thing was puzzling, and then they explained the tasking was that not just a place but a time. It was the opening ceremonies for those Olympics, which involved massive fireworks display. And so I realized at that point, oh, I got the fireworks. See, I had no idea what any of this was. And in fact, I tell people, if you're a remote viewer and you are the last one to know what it was you remote viewed, last one to understand what is remote viewed, that means you are on. Because if you think you know what it is, that's usually your left brain giving you the wrong answer. It's really good to not really understand what it is you're doing. You just do it. You just let it happen. And that's when you're most likely going to be successful. All right. There are some problems with remote viewing. The first one is fear of failure. Okay. I think I have a slide. So remote viewing is a very Zen-like thing. When you're in Zen, of course, the whole thing is not about the outcome. It's not about the goal. It's about the process that you go through. And in Zen archery, it's how you grasp the bow. It's how you knock the arrow. It's how you draw the string. It's how you release. It's not even about whether you hit the target or not. And in remote viewing is the same way. To the degree that you worry about whether you're going to get it right or not, that's the degree that you're going to fail, because you get too invested in the outcome. You stop attending to doing it properly, doing the process properly, and you will mess up. There's this Far Side cartoon I really love. It shows the guy in the orchestra that plays the cymbals in the back, right? And I don't know, I think his name was Harry. So Harry's up there, he's got this thought bubble over his head saying, this time I'm not going to screw up. This time I'm not going to screw up. This time I'm not going to screw up. And the caption is Harry screws up, because Harry's been so focused on not messing up and getting it right. So he's fearing failure that he's picked up one symbol and forgot to pick up the other one. So if you are worried about, if you're focused on, gee, what is the target? What is the target? I want to find out what the target is. Boy, I don't want to mess this up. I want to succeed. I don't want to mess this up. You will mess it up. That's the irony of this whole remote view process. You have to get into it with it just kind of a, oh, well, I'm curious, let's see what happens kind of a feel. And then you're much more likely to have success. All right. All right. To succeed, you have to be willing to fail. It's a very interesting paradox that is absolutely true in this skill. Okay. All right. Another problem is mental noise. And I've mentioned this already a little bit. There's different kinds of mental noise, but I'm going to talk, let's see, what's my next step? I'm going to talk about analytical overlay. Those other things we won't have time except maybe the Q&A to cover. So analytical overlay is where your left brain tries to solve the problem for you and it doesn't know what it's doing. Okay. Remote viewing, in fact, any psychic behavior really is kind of a low bandwidth thing. You've got this subtle signal that's coming in and it's got to compete with all the other stuff that's going on to get up in your conscious awareness where you can do something with it, where you can let people know about it. But your left brain, in a way, is an enemy to that. Now, I'm going to talk left brain, right brain. I know that that's overly simplistic. There's a lot more complication going on in hemisphericity and in neuroscience, but it's a simple way of thinking about this. So your left brain is kind of your enemy in remote viewing because it wants to give you the answer even when it doesn't have enough information. So it doesn't have enough information, but it will continue to offer things, past memories, guesses, speculations, fantasy, whatever will work. It'll offer that as a solution to this problem. And most of it has absolutely nothing to do with what the actual target is, what the signal is. So analytical overlay, main component of mental noise, is a real difficulty that you have to overcome. So people say, what do you teach people when you teach them remote viewing? Well, my courses are 40 hours long, 5.5 days, tons of work. And then they'll say, well, you must teach them a lot of stuff. And I say, I do teach them a lot of stuff, but you can boil it down to three things. The first thing is recognizing the subtle signal that's coming in. The second is recognizing the mental noise and understanding it. And the third is learning how to tell the difference. And that boils down to, that's the basic principle of how you learn remote viewing. But as they say, the devil is in the details, and there's a whole lot to that, because the left brain is a very powerful thing in our lives, in our mental processing, and it's really tough to deal with that. So anyway, all right. So here are what remote viewing is not like. And it's almost important to know what it is not like as it is to know what it is like. So first, it is not sharp, clear visuals. But people say, well, I thought this was called remote viewing. Well, I'm going to see the target, aren't I? And in fact, no, you're not exactly. What you're going to get are the bits and pieces that eventually come together. So the guy who it's hard to say, discovered, invented, created, I'm not sure the right word to use there, but that came up with remote viewing, a guy named Ingo Swann, we'll mention. He called it remote viewing because he really did interact more visually with the target than with his other senses. And of course, that vision is our most important sense in everyday life. So we're used to doing that. But in fact, it should have been called remote perception, I'm sure, because it isn't just viewing. You can also vision. You can also smell, taste, touch, hear in a remote viewing session. And so it's really more the full spectrum of perceptual experience. But we do tend to privilege the visual part of it, but it doesn't come as clear, sharp images. Those are almost always left brain constructs based on memory and speculation. So you have to learn to kind of get past those and recognize the more subtle visual experiences going on. And that can involve colors and what I call qualities of light. That is how light interacts with surfaces and substances. So red is a color, but clear is a quality of light. Shiny is a quality of light, but ochre is a color, right? So that's the distinction in these visual components. Okay, complex and logical full stories are always wrong. If you think you know what the target is, you're almost certainly wrong about what you think you know. There are occasional exceptions, but generally speaking, if it makes sense to you, then you're on the wrong track. That's usually how it turns out. Anything as neat and easily understandable is probably your left brain trying to turn it into a neat little package. And so always suspect those kind of things. Now, oftentimes you'll get that in a session. What you have to learn is to go behind that. Start with the sensory experiences. What am I smelling? What am I feeling? What am I seeing? What am I seeing in terms of color and qualities of light? What am I hearing here? And put down what you hear, not what you think it is. And then you'll be much more likely to be correct. Okay, so what are true impressions like? They're usually vague and somewhat unclear, as I've already explained for a fair amount here. They come in kind of like a half-remembered memory. It's like this vague memory that's coming back. You're trying to kind of recall from your past, and it has that quality, and yet you know that this is a memory that is new. Even though it has the quality of an old memory, this is new. You've not had this experience before. Often impressions you get that are swift, sudden, surprising turn out to be real, correct, because they come in too quick for the left brain to actually manipulate them, right? And so oftentimes what surprises you in a session, like you go along thinking, well, I've got this farmhouse with a bunch of cows around it. All of a sudden you get this flash of shiny metal and clear glass and whatever. That's actually more likely to be right than what you're thinking about farms and cows and stuff. Oftentimes it's hard to actually find a word that matches what your experience is. And that's why oftentimes sketching is useful, because you can sketch things that you can't verbally express as well as you feel like you want to. And very often the remote viewing impressions aren't complex or well formed. They're often very fragmentary. And I'm going to discuss that here momentarily. Okay, so here's an example of analytic overlay or noise in a remote viewing session. Again, this is another CRV session. You get the basic stuff to begin with, and then what did I do? Now it's not advancing again. Okay, there we go. And then this viewer drew this sketch. he got the idea it was a bridge, but, and then he drew the sketch and he thought about it. He said, no, that's not right. And there's an AOL he took on that. He said, that's not right. I'm going to resketch this. And then he came up with this sketch. Notice he's got this AOL break cable car. It suggested a cable car too, I think, because of the cables, right? And then he described it this way. The target is an expansive structure that's broad, impressions of gray and dark clay red. There is water present, makes me think of a suspension bridge, okay? So, in fact, he was right. That was the bridge. This is the Pennybacker Bridge in Austin. And notice it is dark clay red, perfect description of it. There's water present. It is obviously a bridge, right? And you can see the difference between the two sketches he drew. This one has elements of it, right? It's got the archy part. It's got the down cabley part, but he's turned it into the Tower Bridge in London, I think was what his AOL was, right? And then he's thinking, that's not right. There's some noise going on here. And then he drew one that's much less noisy. There's still some going on. He's got these towers that aren't there, but nonetheless, you can see that as he worked into the session, he was able to get past the AOL and get into more accurate data. And that's kind of how this unfolds. Okay, so finally, one of the problems is that it's a fragmentary process. It's not, you don't see a video of the target. You get parts of it and you have to sort of bring those together. So how are we doing on time? We're okay so far? Okay, so when the viewer got into this, all they're getting is bits and pieces. And so they do the lines and they don't know how they go together. They just put them down because they feel right. Just put them on the page, okay? And then they start getting a bit better, more grasp on how these parts relate. And then even better grasp. And you can see this evolving as they go through. And then they even get a fairly representative graphic description of it. So a sketch, in other words. And then thinking, well, I can't really capture this just like in a normal view kind of thing. I need to draw a map, right? And so they put themselves above and then try and feel where the different parts of this thing are. And they get that. And then they draw a more complicated version of it. They say there's a bunch of these things. I don't want to make them all precise, so I'm just going to indicate where they are. And then they make a model of it. Okay. This was a stage 6 CRV session. And this was the same viewer that did the dam, right? He said, a guy named Tom McNair, he is arguably the best CRVer ever taught. He said, well, there's a whole bunch of these things, but I'm only going to make one of them, put dots where they are. Okay. But then you say, well, what is it? Well, this was the target. Okay. And here they are compared. He's even got the water tower in the right place, right? The 3 cooling towers, buildings in between. He doesn't have all of them, obviously, but this is right. This is the substation behind, right? I mean, this is amazing. Think about it, he was totally blind to this target. He had no idea what it was. And yet, as going through the process he learned, he's able to create this with that kind of accuracy. Yeah, lots of details are missing. But the fact is, you might not do a lot better if you're sitting there looking at it and create it. So it's an amazing thing. It shows you what this process is capable of doing. Okay. Now, obviously, I'm showing you concrete things. I haven't showed you the kinds of things we did when we did events and stuff. And depending on time, I may be able to show you one of those. But, you know, it's interesting. But you notice how it started off with just little bits and pieces. And over time, because he did it properly, he was following the Zen approach of just sticking with the process, not trying to focus on what it is. He was able to create this really quite striking representation of the target, despite not having any idea about it. Okay.
So Paul, just so you know, we're at 11:53 our time at least. So we've got a little over a half hour until technical end time.
Okay. I may be abbreviating some of this. We'll see. Okay. The problem is I get into it and I get excited and I start to over explain, but oh well.
I think we're all fascinated. So if we run a little bit over, we're recording it so people can catch it if they have to leave.
Okay. All right. Thanks. All right. So a little background, where did remote viewing come from? Kind of the history of it. It was started by this guy, Ingo Swann. And he was working with some folks, Gertrude Schmeider, Carlos Osis, Cleve Baxter in New York. This is kind of the heyday of parapsychology research in the 70s. Gertrude Schmeider was at the City College of New York. Now it's the City University of New York or something like that. Carlos Osis was with the American Society of Psychical Research, which is housed in this very valuable building now in uptown New York. And Cleve actually was one of the leading experts on polygraphy, on lie detectors. Even when he was in his 80s, he was still sought out by the CIA and the FBI when they had technical problems with their polygraphs and stuff. But he also did, you may have heard of this, he did research where he hooked up a plant to a polygraph and then threatened to harm it or maybe cut off a leaf or something, and the plant registered, literally. So anyway, and they did a Mythbusters episode to prove this was wrong, and then they proved it was right. The results actually replicated, and then they really struggled to come up with explaining why they were still wrong. As typical skeptic. Anyway, the research actually came into full bloom at Stanford Research Institute, now called SRI International, originally owned by Stanford University. It's now one of the largest government supporting think tanks in the world, multi-million-dollar, maybe billion-dollar budgets now. And the people who were head of the program were Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann. I refer to these folks as the Simon and Garfunkel of remote viewing. You can see why, those of you familiar with Simon Garfunkel. Here's Hal with Ingo. So what started was Hal and Ingo getting together for a very successful experiment, and the CIA getting knowledge of it and needing somebody to research this, because the Russians were literally spending hundreds of millions of dollars, not rubles, but dollars, okay, hundreds of millions of dollars in what we would call paranormal research. And the government gets criticized for spending $20 to $25 million over 23 years on researching remote viewing. And yet the Russians in the 60s and early 70s were spending hundreds of millions of dollars on this. And so CIA really needed to find out why they were doing it. And it turned out because it works, okay? Because it works. All right, so the US Army adopted in 1977 and created their operational part of the program in 79. We worked out of this building and another one, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute. These are old World War II temporary buildings that were still being operated into the 90s. We had a senator come to this, and he walked up the stairs and he looked around and said, "Where are all the homeless people?" It looks like the kind of place that they'd hang out, But you know what? It was great cover. Nobody ever suspected we had a black special access program going on in a building like that. All right. In '86, the Defense Intelligence Agency took it over. When people think of the military doing this kind of thing, this sometimes crops into their minds. Okay. But it really isn't, that really isn't how it goes, right? So I left out the CIA part. I'm going to leave that there. So in 1995, Congress ordered the CIA to take the program over. The CIA didn't want it. So they accepted the program because they got 12 personnel slots. And this was during a time when they were downsizing everything. So 12 personnel slots is a real gift. And then they proceeded to keep the slots and cancel the program. They didn't even ever actually put it into operation. And despite that, people think of it as the CIA program. The CIA never ran the program. They canceled the program. Okay. And they came out with a report that was just total balderdash. It was, I don't have time to get into that, but the report, a lot of journalists think, oh, the report proved that it didn't work. Well, no, it didn't, because they didn't even write the report until after they canceled the program. Well, anyway, that's a whole different topic. All right, so here are some examples of military projects. This one was done this was the third project we did in 1986, 8603. Again, I was the viewer on it. I got impressions of the shapes. And it made me think it was a MIRV, which is a multiple warhead ICBM, a ballistic missile that has multiple warheads on it. And you can see what my sketches were and what I thought about it. And that was actually the target, was a MIRV. It turned out to be right. And you can see, again, totally blind, right? In fact, this was fully double blind. And yet, nonetheless, I got a really nice representation of it. Now, it so happened, this wasn't the actual target. This is an American MIRV. The one I was doing was a Soviet MIRV, and I was targeted on it at the time it was re-entering after I've gone out exoatmospheric and back in again. So not only was this a hard target to do in the first place, it was a moving target. It was moving really fast. Okay. So anyway, here's another one. We sometimes were asked to do to remote view our own secrets, right? This was the stealth aircraft program, and this was before it was revealed. This is when it was still also a special access program. We had no idea what this was. We didn't even know it was an aircraft. We were then totally double blind on this. But shortly we discovered it as an aircraft, and then we described it. Aircraft with low radar signature, special skin, bat-like wings, radar foiling devices, etc. Date of information, summer of '87. That's when we did this work. The stealth wasn't even revealed until 1988. And you can see that we have some pretty good, captured some pretty good impressions about it. We did, in fact, accurately describe it. Now, there's some distortions. This was a guy named Mel Riley. He got it mixed up with an SR-71, which is long and thin like this. But his front view of it is really on the money. It's just amazing. Anyway, Soviet phased array radar. This is an anti-ballistic missile radar. You can see what it looks like today. This one is actually another one. This is the one that was targeted. And you can see even down to getting the antenna and the stuff on the top, right? We did a lot of counter narcotics problems, very successful. This was one example of one. The goal was to find out where the narcotics was on a container ship. Do I have a picture of that? No. I normally have a picture of a container ship. I guess go find it and put it in here, but not right now. They've got these hundreds and sometimes even thousands of containers on there. Well, there's contraband on the ship. Some informant might tell you, where on the ship is it? These hundreds and thousands of containers. And this was a success. We actually succeeded in locating the contraband on this ship. Okay, so I think maybe I'll skip this next part. I'll just give you a 2-minute summary. Okay, so I was this was done in 15 May 87, precognitive remote viewing. So the task was to describe the most important event for us, as in the intelligence established, to know about the next few days. And in the process, I described something that seemed like an American destroyer. And I also got this impression of an aircraft off in a distance, and it drops these cylinders that have little stubby wings. They make roaring, guttering sounds, and people on the vessel, on this ship, detect these things and can't believe it's going on, and they're kind of confused. What do we do? What do we do? And then these little cylinders hit this ship, and there's a loud noise, there's squealing, the ship shakes and shivers, and then it leans over to the side. It's all twisted and sagging, and there's smoke and fire hoses and stuff. I get the impression of those kind of things. So the structure is like it's crumpled or bent, goes out of line. So essentially, large metallic vessel sailing at night, aircraft flying the distance, it drops a cylindrical object. The object and the vessel come together. There's smoke, consternation, and mayhem. And it's out in the middle of water, surrounded by sandy land. Okay. So what happened? Well, this was on Friday. The guy I was working with said, well, you're off. He was expecting me to get something else, right? He said, no, you're off, but that's okay. People are off all the time, not a big deal. So I put that in my safe, went home for the weekend. Monday morning, I get a call from Skip Atwater, our operations officer. He says, Paul, where's that session you did on Friday? I said, well, it's in my safe. Why do you care? I was off. He said, you haven't seen the papers yet, have you? No. So I get out my copy of the Washington Post and I'm reading my remote viewing session in print in the Washington Post. Exactly what I said in that session is what happened 50 hours later on Sunday night. So this was the USS Stark. It was hit by Exocet missiles fired by an Iraqi jet out in the Persian Gulf at night. And this is what the ship looked like after it had been hit. So, I mean, this was the best remote viewing session I ever did and the cleanest. There was almost no noise in this. I have no idea how that happened. And I almost am embarrassed to take credit for it because I don't know how I did it. You know, it was amazing. So 50 hours before it happened, I had described very accurately event, and nothing like this event had ever happened before or since with regard to American vessel. So, at least in, you know, in these circumstances. And it was amazing. Now, unfortunately, it didn't do any good because we didn't think it was correct, and so we didn't report it. If we'd reported it, it probably would have stopped it from happening because the ship was out there. It wasn't expecting any trouble, so it didn't have its air defense systems up. If those radars had been up, the Iraqi jet would have detected them and realized, oh, I better not shoot because they will shoot back, right? And it probably wouldn't have happened, and we would have saved 37 Americans. But at least it does give us really good evidence that remote viewing works, even sometimes when it's into the future. Okay, I was able to compare it. I was taking indications and warning classes at what was then the Defense Intelligence College, and they issued this as one of the texts, was the report, the investigation of that event. So I was able to actually compare in detail my session with the actual events, and it's just stunning how accurate that had been. All right, I don't need to go into that. So how do you become good at remote viewing? First of all, you have to have an open mind. You don't have to believe it. You just have to allow the possibility to exist. That's the starting point. You learn proper principles. You develop an understanding of yourself. And this takes a little while. You have to understand how you function when this happens. And it really is kind of that's part of the Zen thing, right? In fact, I joke that if the American Psychological Association knew how therapeutic remote viewing could be, they'd make us all get licenses to teach it. But whatever, you have to develop an understanding of yourself. You have to engage in conscientious practice, and you have to resist taking the easy way. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go off on a soapbox about the easy way, but you have to be aware that there's work involved. It isn't something you just take a weekend class and succeed at. You have to be prepared for that. Okay, so you want to try it? Anybody here not want to try it? Well, I see a wavy hand. That's one good sign. All right. Okay. So first thing you'll need to do is have your paper and pen handy. And then what we're going to remote view, and I hope I haven't messed anything up here. We're going to remote view what is in remote viewing room 1. I did mess up. There should be a 1 after that. What is in remote viewing room 1? Well, what is remote viewing room 1? In my training facility, I have a remote viewing room 1. Okay. I just took these pictures last night. This is fresh imagery, right? Remote viewing room 1. The inside of it looks like this. There's a table. There's a gray window in the back. From the inside, it looks like this. Oops, sorry. From the inside, it looks like this. So there's a lamp in the corner. I'm showing you all these things so you know that's what I don't want you to remote view. All of this stuff is always there. Okay. What is not always there is what's now inside that room. This is the room. There is an object on the table, and it's a distinct object. It's not something that's just boring and tedious, and and it's easily overlooked. Okay. I put it on the table. I left the light on so you can see it. Okay. And I closed the door. Okay, so it's in there. Now I'm going to talk you through how you can remote view this. So steps for basic remote viewing. First one is just relax. You're not going to not get admitted to college if you don't succeed at this, right? You're not going to have some kind of the IRS is going to audit you. Nobody's going to care. No one will make fun of you if you don't get it, right? So you got to relax. Don't worry about the outcome. Then you clear your mind. Now, clearing your mind doesn't mean you just dump everything out on the ground and then you have a blank mind. First of all, it's impossible to do that anyway. And second of all, what that means is that even the signal will go out the door. When you'll jettison everything in your mind, you jettison the signal that you're going to be getting also. So clearing your mind, it's another Zen-like kind of component to remote viewing. As thoughts come in, you let them go out. You don't hold on to them. You don't focus on them. You don't fixate on them. As they come in, you let them go out. And so you let them go out in two ways. If it's something that can't possibly have anything to do with the session, you just let them go and forget them. If it's something that could have something to do with the session, you write it on your paper or you sketch it. Now, sometimes you'll get impressions like, so if the target was the Eiffel Tower, you get maybe black. Well, you write down black, right? You might get the impression of hard. You might write down hard. You might get the impression of something curving up. You just sketch that line. Don't worry about what it means. Just sketch this feeling you're getting of something curving up. And you put those things down as you go. And then all of a sudden you get the idea, oh, I know, it's a Tesla. Oh, no, it's not a Tesla. Over on the right, just write down, reminds me of a Tesla, right? Okay. And then you go back, well, what's the shape? What's the smell? What's the sound? You write these things down and you focus on, and well, we'll get to that in a second. So pay attention to the basic, simple impressions, like the colors, like the qualities of light, like the tactiles. If there's a smell, then you can put the smell you're detecting down. If there is a sound, put the sound down. Now, maybe it makes a sound, but it's not making the sound right now. That's always possible. Put down the sound that it makes, okay? And I'm talking about just describe the sound. Words like, I don't know, I don't want to say anything that'll give you any lead in here, so I won't give you an example, but just pay attention to basic, simple impressions at first, right? Remember that complete pictures, logical stories are probably wrong, but you still want to capture those, so put them over on the right. That's where we put our mental noise, okay? Don't worry about being wrong. That's also don't worry about being right. It's kind of the corollary. It's both of those. Don't worry about being right. Don't worry about being wrong, okay? Surprises are more likely to be correct, okay? So if something surprising pops in your mind, put that down. Both sketching and words are important. And when I say words, the words themselves are important. It's the concepts the words represent. Okay, so both sketching and concepts are important, but focus on sketching because oftentimes that turns out to be the most accurate thing, because you can think of the sketches you make as your right brain talking straight to your hand and bypassing the left brain. Okay, and so oftentimes those sketches are completely accurate. You put them down there and you don't know what they are because sometimes they don't look like anything that your left brain recognizes, right? And so that's fine. If you don't know what it is, that's perfectly fine. Just get it on the paper. If you don't put it on the paper, it's not going to count if it turns out to be right, okay? Focus on sketching and bring yourself back to the target every now and then, because humans are constructed so that their minds wander. That's part of the survival characteristics. If you are such that you focus so much on the ripe apple that you don't see the leopard sneaking up on you, you're out of the DNA pool right then, right? So we have been essentially created so that our consciousness, our attention, our perceptions wander. So every now and again, come back to the target. Now I'm going to help you with this because I'm going to every once in a while pipe up and say, okay, now bring your attention back to what's in remote viewing room 1, and I might say, don't forget to address colors and sounds and smells and stuff, just as a reminder to help bring you back. And I just realized I've been talking all this time with my microphone clear over there. Have you been able to hear me okay? Okay, well, I'm going to move it over here just in case. All right. So, so I need a manager, otherwise I'll forget that symbol I should have and I'll screw up. So anyway, okay, so bring yourself back and I'll help you bring your attention back to room one as you go. All right. So to prepare on your paper, put your name, date, and where you are in the upper right-hand corner of the paper. Okay. And then when you hear me say target, you'll write the word target over in the left margin and you'll begin. Now, let me see. I hope I've got another slide. Yes. Okay. Okay. So I think this next slide I may have messed up. We'll see. Yes. So we'll skip that part. When I say target, what that means is describe what you perceive on the table in remote viewing room one. That's all the word target means. It means describe, perceive and describe. Let me make it clear that way. Perceive and describe what is on the table in remote viewing one at present time. Okay, so are you ready? Everybody wave their hand to tell me you're ready. Okay, you look good. You look good. Okay, now scratch your nose. No, just kidding. Okay, all right, get set. Target. Remember, what you're perceiving doesn't have to make sense. Put it down even if it doesn't seem to make sense to you. Remember to bring your attention back to the object in remote viewing room one. And we want textures, tactile experience, colors, etc. we'll go for about another 2 minutes. Perceiving, describing what's in remote viewing room 1 on the table. Okay, start thinking about wrapping up. Okay, let's wrap up. We're going to end, just write a little end, the word end at the bottom of everything you've done. I guess people who watch a recording, they could still actually do this. But you might want to add an instruction that when we get to this point, they maybe pause it long enough to do their own session, whatever, I don't know. But all right, so you're going to get your feedback right now. Remember I said how important that was? So if you're ready, wait for it. Feedback. Yes, it is an electric chainsaw. Here's how it looks in the room on the table. Here's how it is from another angle, because oftentimes when you're doing this, you may come in on this from any particular angle, right? So I'm going to show you various views of this thing to kind of help you gauge. Okay. So just out of curiosity, and I only see a few of you, but how many of you feel like you got at least some elements of this? Okay. Okay, good. I don't know how we could do this. I usually like to have people share the results. We probably can't really do that, manage that in this format.
Well, if you want to do your put that over in the chat, you all, if you want to do that, and we can pull in a few of those. Mine was pretty funny because I drew chattering teeth because I heard teeth in my head. Teeth on a chainsaw. So
yes. and oftentimes it works that way. You get these sort of metaphorical kind of things, that remind you of it, and it's your left brain trying to understand it. So they come up with something that makes sense to it, and so yeah, that's intriguing. That is actually kind of funny.
It made me laugh right out loud. Okay, so we've got a cold metal smaller than a bread box and electric, not a chainsaw shape. One person drew a dinosaur. Violet got the chain part in that it was a long machine.
Okay.
Teeth-like structures right at the end. Kathy got that. Kathy and I were on the same wavelength there. Something cold metal and dark gray. Black, small curves along the edge of the teeth movement.
I like that green and black. Somebody got green and black. That's awesome.
Yeah. The black handle part. What kind of tree was it used on? Somebody asked.
Yeah, about every kind of tree that grows in Utah and some that don't.
One got the smell of gas, the jingling noise it makes when it
Yeah.
idles. I got a chatter noise myself personally too. Something on the left corner and it had some black, something on the electric or some kind of cord. Is there a cord on that one? Is there something leaking or dripping in the room?
Well, you do plug a cord into it. No, at least I hope not. there wasn't when I left last night.
Dark and light colors, humming noises, heavy. Yeah, there's a lot of people who got a lot of
So
things.
Ava's is awesome. I
Yeah.
got green, black, heavy for its size, cold to touch, and sitting on corner, electric. Okay, there are a lot of good impressions there. Yeah, and of course there is a lot of gray on this thing. The cord. Well, there isn't a cord there, but it's certainly associated with a cord, right? Very importantly associated with it. Angels. Okay. Well, I feel like this is kind of an angelic thing because it's so useful. It's you know.
Was that supposed to be angels, Jen, or I think it might have been angles?
Oh, maybe. Okay. Okay. Well, all right then. I sorry, misread. The angles. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Okay.
looks like a lot of people got things. The
Yes, and
circular part.
see, I got the shape of the handle and the cap shape. Yes, actually, oftentimes, like I said, you'll get pieces of something, right? You'll get bits of it, and it is dirty, Anna, or no, Valerie. Yeah, it is dirty. Yep, I'm not real great on maintenance. I can tell from the rest of my room, right? Circular points. Okay, excellent, good. Well, it looks to me like a lot of folks got elements of this, so that's always good when you know, what is that from the A team? You love it when a plan comes together, right? So, all right. Well, in the interest of our timing here, whoops, I'm going to click over here. How did you do? Well, we already discussed that. So I always think of this when we deal with remote viewing. So these two guys looking at a fallen star, right? This changes some of our preconceived notions about the universe, right? So I have actually given versions of this talk, and there are skeptics in the audience, and it either freaks them out or they're not quite so skeptical when they're done. They may not necessarily be converted, right? But they're very often saying, well, maybe there's more to this than I thought there was, right? And then there are the skeptics who are so invested in their skepticism that it just freaks them out, and then they start their own cognitive biases start intruding. So anyway, okay, so you can read a whole lot more about this in my book, The Essential Guide to Remote Viewing. I wrote this book specifically for folks who are new to the field and want a no-nonsense, no fantasy exploration of this. It's available on Amazon. I, of course, encourage you to get it, not because I make a lot of money off of it, because if you know Amazon, you know you don't make a lot of money off of it, but because I am a bit of an evangelist when it comes to remote viewing. I've adopted, let's see, what do I say? I've converted my Mormon missionary skills into proselyting for remote viewing, I guess you could say, right? And so if you really are curious and want more information, this is a great place to start. Okay. And then there's my website, rviewer.com. I should change that URL just to rviewer.com. You don't need the www anymore, but that's okay. So, okay, I think we're ready for some Q&A.
All right, I'm going to have you stop sharing so we can see
Yes.
everyone.
How interesting. Oh, right. My share screen is over here now.
Yes.
Stop sharing. Okay, good.
All right. And then I'm going to call on you all. Some of you have a lot of questions, and we're going to go ahead and I'm going to call on you in the order that you did, but please limit it to one question, you guys, just so we can get everybody in here. And we're already at our time. So I am going to extend the time of this class for 1/2 hour. And then we're going to call it that. So
you can extend it for a half hour. I can't stay that long, unfortunately.
Then we're not keeping it for a half hour. We're staying until Paul says, I got to go.
Yeah.
So
I can give you at least 10 minutes. I have another thing happening at 1:15. So,
beautiful.
and I
Okay.
still haven't had breakfast. So,
Oh no. Okay. Well, let me allow that. So I will call on you first. KO, pick your favorite of the questions that you asked, please.
My favorite question is this: are you allowed to ask yes or no questions? And mine was with the electrical cord. I kept seeing an electrical cord, but not. And I'm like, can you say, is there an electrical cord?
well, you can, and some people have had success with that. But here's the problem. When you ask the question like that, it's your left brain that first responds, right?
Right.
And so that could possibly generate more noise. But my advice here is what works, right? So if you find that you are successful doing that, there's nothing wrong with it.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. And then we had a question behind the scenes that was, how much time does a remote viewer have to work on a target? Is there a set time?
No, there's not an end date on it, and it literally can be end date. I mean, some sessions I've worked maybe 2 or 3 days on, but you're not working the whole time. Generally, you work till you're tired. And I really, if I'm working on a full up operational project, about 90 minutes, I've hit my max, right? I have worked longer on them before, but that was when I was much younger and dumber. But but generally, I think a half an hour is a good time for somebody who's just starting out. And if you're doing a really basic one, you don't even need that much time.
Okay, awesome. Jay, and there was a couple of people had this question. How can we use this in day-to-day activities?
Well, that's a good question. People ask me that question. Do you still use it in your daily life? And I say no. Okay. Generally speaking, this was meant to be a utilitarian thing where you had a problem, somebody presented your problem, and you did it. But what I found was valuable with remote viewing, even if when I'm not, and I still use it because I do operational work, right? But how it's helped my day-to-day life is in enhancing my connection to my intuitive faculties. So remote viewing, you're taught how to turn it off and how to turn it off, so that when you're done remote viewing, you shut it down, you don't do it anymore. But it's still, you've got your intuition running in the background all the time. And most people don't really actualize their intuition because they don't realize how it works. They don't realize what it means when it's talking to you. But getting experience in remote viewing, you really learn when you're getting signal and when you're getting noise. And so oftentimes it's like, alerts on your computer pop up in the back, something running in the background, discovers there's a like malware on a site, pops up and tells you that, right? When you come to recognize when your intuition is talking to you, which remote viewing really helps, then you actually find that you're more responsive to it, and you're actually having successes because of that, or you're avoiding disaster because of that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Paul. All right, Robin, pick one of your questions.
Thank you. This was amazing. Your expertise is so valuable, even for things that are not about remote viewing, and also you're a great speaker. Do you have any idea or insight as to how we're getting this information? Where does the communication come from? How can we possibly know about something going on many miles from us?
So one of my friends and colleagues and former commander of the Stargate unit, Bill Ray, he just says it's magic. Okay, but that's a kind of a non-answer when you get right down to it. And the full answer is, well, the real answer is we don't really know. We have speculations, right? Some people think it may be quantum non-locality that feeds it, and that's not impossible. I have my doubts about that. I personally think it's a non-physical thing, right? And of course, in today's mainstream science, there's no such thing as non-physical. Everything is physical. Whether it's energy or matter, that's the debate, but everything is non-physical, or is physical rather. I think this is evidence that there are non-physical elements to the universe, and ultimately that would be my answer. And so essentially, when you say it's non-physical, you are saying you don't know, right? But at least it takes us out of this attempt to explain. Now, I don't think we should stop trying to explain it in physical terms, because we still learn stuff even if we never do arrive at a full explanation. But I suspect in the end, that's what it is. So.
All right, we have a specific question about the room. In the room where the item was the gray thing, I think on the wall, was that covering a window?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. And then so I'm trying to go back through my things. Charity, you have a question?
Oh, I was just wondering if you could give tips to like how to clear out the noise. Like obviously right away I had a thought of what it was. Yeah. And I was drawing something that I didn't think it was. And then I started drawing teddy bears, which I saw a lot of people thought it was a teddy bear. And so like, how do you clear out? How do you clear it out?
See, there you go. I mean, the fact that you're drawing something you recognized is a hot clue that that was wrong. Okay. How do you clear out the noise? Well, I still struggle with that. Everybody does. You never lose that altogether because it's such a strong component of our mental faculties, right? In fact, in everyday life, it's really valuable because in everyday life, you're working in a high bandwidth situation and your left brain input is almost always right. Okay. But then when you get into this low bandwidth situation, it still thinks it's that old joke, rule number 1 is the boss is always right. Rule number 2 is if the boss is ever wrong, the boss is always right, and that's the way your left brain operates. Even when it's wrong, you better darn believe it, right? And so how do you deal with that? Well, first off, trial and error, a lot of experience helps, a lot of practice. But I'll tell my students, I'll say, well, one thing you can do is doubt, right? When you start thinking you know what it is, start thinking, well, maybe I don't actually know what it is, right? And then try and get behind that to that raw data I was talking about, the impressions, the bits and pieces, and let those begin to tell you what it is. Without taking my 5.5-day class, I mean, I go into it in great detail, how you deal with mental noise there, but it's just not possible in this venue, unfortunately. So,
yeah, Paul, do you have any insight into why so many people saw teddy bears? Like, what is there a collective idea of that? Does that happen?
A lot of people did see teddy bears.
A lot of people saw teddy bears.
Okay, that's a really good question. I do often get plush animal responses. And I think maybe it just goes to the basis of, gee, what would I pick if I was going to put a target in there? Well, I really love teddy bears. Okay, I'm going to put that in there, and it could be operating at the subconscious level. I can't tell you exactly, other than that there does seem to be a popular go-to in these kinds of things of plush animals of sorts. So.
Okay. And then someone was asking for an online remote viewing group. I believe you have one on Facebook. Is that accurate?
Yes, I do. It's the remote viewing / remote perception Facebook group. It's a private
Anna, could you pop that link up?
Say again?
I think Anna, could you pop that link into the chat?
That would be awesome. Yeah. And when you sign in, because it is private, you have to agree to the group rules. Oh, there's the teddy bear. See, there you go. You put that teddy bear in our feedback loop. That's what happened. You have now explained why everybody got teddy bears.
Well, it's interesting too with this group because a lot of us have little moments of almost telepathy with each other. So I'm curious to know how that works too. All right. I have you down as iPhone. So you're going to have to unmute yourself, iPhone, and tell us who you are. If you have your hand up right now. Hi. Are you there?
There.
Oh, is that me?
Yep.
There you go.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So my question is, how long do you think it takes, if you do the course, for example, I was looking at your website, to actually get good at this? I mean, I got like little squiggly lines all over the place on my target. And I did try like a remote viewing online course, and I got nowhere with it. So what's the kind of learning curve, I guess, for if I was to take your course?
Well, it depends on how I say teachable is probably not exactly the right word, but some people just seem to learn this easier. Now, doesn't mean that if you're not learning it easy, you're not going to succeed. I've had people who really struggled out of the gate, really had a horrible time, and eventually became really, really awesome viewers. It's sometimes letting go of past beliefs about it. It's kind of sometimes letting go of just trying to get your left brain out of the thing. And there's all kinds of things. But let's say the average person, when you finish the in-person course, you will have demonstrated yourself very convincingly in probably, I've only had 1 or 2 students in my entire career who failed totally. And that was because they just couldn't do it, right? For whatever reason, couldn't learn it usually is what the problem is. You will have convinced yourself at that point that you really are able to do it, right? But to become really reliable, really competent, operational level, that's going to take, at least 3 months of concerted effort, but usually more likely 6 months to a year to that point, because you do have to do a lot of practicing. I can teach you the principles and give you some opportunities to experience it. But in the end, just like playing the violin, the teacher can give you the principles. You got to go home and incorporate those into your system, right?
All right. What a perfect thing to end on. Do the work, as we always say in Awkwardly Zen. All right, guys. I want to say thank you so much to Paul for coming and teaching with us today. It was amazing, Paul. And I want to also thank all of you for being here and participating. And I know that not every question got answered, but Paul, thank you for your extra time today. And then this recording will be on the video section of awkwardlyzen.com. So if you're a part of our free membership, that is now on the right side. The newest videos will show up and give you a link to our YouTube channel. So it'll probably be a day or 2. So give us a little bit of time.
So one moment. So will the chat be there as well? Or
I am going to save the chat and we'll put it up in the
okay.
We'll put that in the Google Drive and add a link to that to the YouTube channel as well, so that you guys can all see it, because I know it's a fun one. And make
I
sure
don't know how we could do this, but possibly I might be able to answer a few of these questions in the next day or so or something. If there's a mechanism how we can handle that.
you want them to shoot you an email, or how would you like to do that?
Oh man, I get too much email.
I know that's challenge there. If they find you on your Facebook page, can they ask questions there? And probably a lot
I'll tell you what, if they join the group and they want to pose, if they want to pose a question there, that'd be great. In fact, then the other group members would benefit from it as well. That's awesome. That would be a great solution.
Great. Perfect. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you all so much for being there. Paul, if you want to stick around for just a second. Sure. And thanks, you all. Have a great day, and we'll see you at our other events.